like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hi everyone, welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999. I'm Tom Mison with Kenny Nybart and Phil Iskov, and we're talking Sleepy Hollow. How was that?
I mean, we can't do better than that, really.
That was good.
That was great.
Keep it all right, we're talking Sleepy Hollow here. We have Tom Mison, the least problematic Ichabod Crane, and Phil Iskov, the least problematic creator of a Sleepy Hollow inspired interpretation. Guys, this is a once in a lifetime thing.
It is.
No, I have, as the host of this podcast, because Phil, today I don't really think you're the host of the podcast. You are an appropriate guest. You are a great get for this podcast, as are you, Tom, to talk about 1999's. Phil's the brain.
I'm not wearing a t-shirt. I've just noticed that Phil's wearing.
Yes, I'm wearing a.
Is it official?
Yeah.
It's not. Well, I mean, no.
Sign on to our Patreon to find out if Tom is wearing anything at all. But
just AirPods.
But here we are. We're talking 1999 Sleepy Hollow, a film that partially inspired Phil to create Fox's Sleepy Hollow with Alex Kurtzman, Bob Orsi, Roberto Orsi, and Len Weissman, and cast Tom as Ichabod Crane. Tremendous show. You guys were obviously, Tom, you were fantastic. Phil, you were a great writer, and you once were, and it's really great to finally kind of be able to open this present that's been sitting on the table for the beginning of this podcast.
I had no idea it was 99. I had no idea this was 99.
That's the reason we're doing the podcast. That's the reason.
It's funny though, because Kenny and I talked about this at the very beginning, where we knew that. We knew that this was sort of sitting on the horizon, and I was just like, I want to do it, but I don't really know how to do it, and I don't know who I'd want to bring on for it, and obviously, Tom, you've been on a couple times now, and it just felt like a no-brainer to bring you on to talk about, not just in terms of, your involvement in the show, but just, you saw this movie. You mentioned, we texted a little bit about this, how you'll obviously tell us your story about how you saw Sleepy Hollow for the first time, because it's great. But I also just feel like, this short story has been interpreted a couple times. A bunch of people have kind of taken whacks at it, and they're all very different in their own ways. But, this feels like do you think it's this version, or do you think it's the Disney version that people, speaking from film as opposed to television, have you shown your kids the Disney one, Kenny? Is that something that they even know?
No.
And so you watched the movie the other day with your son, who had not seen it before, correct?
Yes.
What did he think of it?
He really liked it. And I think period is a bit, particularly, this far back, is a bit of a barrier of entry for some kids that age. But look, he's a big fan of heads being cut off.
Sure. And he loves
and the thing is, Rollins a bit. Listeners have heard this. He really can't be scared by anything. It's just his thing. He just doesn't get scared. Yeah. But what he said at the end was, he goes, "Well, it wasn't scary, but at least there was a great story." So that's good. That's a big win.
That's fantastic. I will say though, so I saw this film in 99. I'm a very big Tim Burton fan, and we're going to do our top 5 favorite Burton films at the end of the podcast. And I'm excited to do that as well. But I was very excited to see this film. And, when I sat down to try to come up with ideas to pitch, Kenny was very much a part of that as well. You might very well remember. I remember IMing with Kenny about the Sleepy Hollow pitch. And as I was coming up with it, and Kenny was instrumental in that. So,
isn't that weird?
So Kenny does
that we were friends that long ago.
We were friends that long ago, and I was sitting at my desk as an assistant at UTA. Kenny was sitting at his desk wherever, I don't know.
I honest to God, I remember exactly where I was because it was before I had kids.
Yes,
and it was a period of time where we had the second room. We had the second. We had the second room in our apartment that I put a desk in that was my office for a couple of days until we had kids. But yeah, I remember exactly where I was when you sent me. And by the way, I tell the story all the time. And I almost want you to tell the story.
Well, I'll tell it from my perspective of what I remember.
Not my part of it. Like the story of you, because I think it's a really great story in general. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. So, I remember you basically sending me 10 ideas, 10 broadcast worthy ideas. And I think you had maybe already narrowed it down to 2.
It was down to 2. Yeah. I
think or maybe, you sent me the 10 and then later you said these are the 2 that we're going to focus on. And I think we talked about it for a little bit and I just threw some ideas at you and I said, you should cast Tom. And that was my big idea. And go ahead. I don't want to make a whole big thing out of me coming up with this idea because lots of people were involved in how this became a television show. But I will say that, I sat down in front of, various pieces of public domain and saw that Washington Irving had created or written, obviously, Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. And I texted Kenny. We were IMing about this. And I was just like, I want to have this guy. He's Ichabod Crane. I want to have him in present day. But like, is it just a present day Ichabod Crane? Or, what exactly should that be? And at the time, and I think I've said this to you as well, Kenny, but I'll say it again, which is that at the time, shortly around this period, the trailer for Dark Shadows had dropped. And as those who remember or have seen this movie, basically, he's a vampire who is buried alive by a witch who, and then he wakes up in 1970s, I believe it's New York State or something along those lines. It's somewhere around, anyway, or maybe it's more coastal. Doesn't matter. Long story short, that plus Kenny saying, why don't you just put the guy to sleep, was sort of this moment where I was just like, oh yeah, he'll just be a man at a time and he'll be Ichabod Crane from 1799. And I mean, obviously, yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
2 questions. First of all, so I'm interested, what had your pitching experience been before?
So I had pitched a couple shows up until that point. I had written a pilot that had gotten some traction, and I had been pitching mostly to like ABC Family, MTV, that type of stuff, because the pilot that I had written was teen oriented. So I had pitched a couple things, but to answer your grander question here, when I think about how little I went into that room with Alex Kurtzman with, it gives me chills, like to this day. Like I was so crazy unprepared for that pitch, in my humble opinion now, knowing what I know, that I didn't have much more than Sleepy Hollow, huh? Like I really did not have much more than that. Which again just frightens me to my core. I'm just thinking.
But then that shows the enduring appeal of
this
story, but actually not the book, because the book, as I'm sure we'll discuss, is shit.
It's not great.
I want to say one other thing, because you're being super humble. That's not totally true. You didn't have nothing. You had a lot, because then I also remember sitting down with you at Kings Road before you went in, and you had a lot at that point. You really had a full, you had a full story. You had the idea of Abby. You had everything that was like, kind of fundamentals, elementals of the show. The other thing that I want to say is, it's not just as simple as Phil saying Sleepy Hollow and putting his hands out, jazz hands. There was another pilot that same season.
That's true.
That was, I think, called like Ichabod or something like that.
I think it was called.
Really?
I don't remember what it was called. There was a CW thing.
There was a CW pilot, and it was the same in that it's Ichabod Crane modern day, but it was different in that it was Ichabod Crane is just a guy
He's just a guy
who
named
works at the FBI, who I think, and now I'm extrapolating, but I'm sure this is what it was. I'm sure it was an X-Files thing, where he's some guy who investigates things like phenomena like the Headless Horseman.
Right.
Which, like,
but
by
has the
way,
characteristics that we know of Ichabod Crane.
Yes.
I mean, this was, which it sort of comes back to the movie a little bit in the sense that my pitch to your original point, Kenny, in terms of like, I was trying to build something a little bit more procedural, something that was a little bit more sort of a, Mulder Scully kind of situation, if you will, a little more Buffy-esque, a little bit more sort of like hardwired into the case of the week type of thing. And part of that stemmed from the film, which is a reinterpretation of Ichabod Crane, who's not a detective in the original source material. He's a weird, fastidious teacher. And they turn him into a detective.
Smacks the kids, I seem to remember. There was
he does. Well,
several paragraphs about.
He's a dick. But yeah. But my point to you,
yes.
here. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I'm going to finish your sentence because I'm an asshole. It's something that I noticed rewatching the film is that, as I say, the book is quite shit. There's not an awful lot to it. It's mainly lists. Yeah. It's lists of crops and things.
It's kind of his,
and then someone chucks a pumpkin.
It was like, that was kind of Washington Irving's thing. He wrote like these weird diatribes. There were like lists. He was like an almanac writer more than like a fiction writer.
Weird.
Very
strange.
Very strange.
In order to adapt it, you need to bring your own completely new story to it. And so in the film, it's, it's the whole will thing and the horseman being brought forth. Yeah. And with you, it was, I can't stop thinking about it since we started talking. To have the Headless Horseman as one of the horsemen of the apocalypse was just a brilliant, brilliant little twist on it. And I'm not surprised that you didn't need to go in with a great deal, and I'm sure you're being, self-deprecating. But
I will say, though,
knowing Alex as we do now, of course that sparked his imagination.
Well, he was just to sort of to give a sense of what that meeting was. The thing that we really hit on was Twin Peaks, which won't surprise anyone who knows Alex, who's an enormous Twin Peaks fan. I wanted to create, and we wanted to create a weird little town, right? And you're not going to find a more iconic name than Sleepy Hollow in terms of knowing that it's a weird little town and that there's a headless horseman, and so it's very fertile territory. To your original point about how the short story might not be great, but it created this petri dish that so many people have been able to kind of glom off of, which I think is really fascinating. I think that this movie capitalizes on that beautifully, in my opinion, of really bringing that to life better than anything, I could imagine. This
movie never would have worked as a TV show because the character of Ichabod in this movie has no legs. But as opposed to the villain who has no head. But
nice.
The little
he's written that down in his notebook and he'll tick that off. Got that gag out.
Right off the dome.
Right off the dome. Just like, what have you put him to sleep? But the little brilliant thing you guys did, Tom, you had very little to do with this, but the really brilliant thing that you did with Kurtzman and Orsi that made this a TV show, it was there always is little what ifs, right? It was, what if Ichabod Crane was cool? It's what if Ichabod Crane was a formidable opponent for the Headless Horseman? And the way you show that as him being a member of Washington's army with that opening scene, with them basically killing each other, and then the blood, that little thing makes you want to go on a ride with Ichabod, no pun, for, how many episodes you guys get? 70 episodes? For 70,
80, yeah.
For 80 episodes because he's cool. Right. And then the relationship with Abby works, and it wouldn't have worked the same way if he was any of the other iterations of Ichabod. And I remember you having your meeting. It was like your first creative meeting with Alex and Bob after you kind of agreed to kind of go through this, and you came back and you're like, you won't believe what we came up with. I at the like that plus what you're talking about, Tom, that plus the pulling in so it's pulling in the Bible and pulling in the American history, the Washington stuff, where I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. I said it to you. I said, I am positive you guys are going to sell this. I am positive this is going to be a show. It just, it's one of those, it's the only one I can think of from, no offense, you know where you are at this point, from an unknown writer, that the idea was just undeniable. It was an irresistible thing.
I will say, and I do think that an important detail was that I kind of always saw him as British. And this isn't me, being like, they didn't get it. It was just sort of like, I didn't see him as American. And it wasn't even because of the historical components of it. They literally said to me, I remember they were like, who's your dream casting for Ichabod? And I said, David Tennant. Because there was that sort of Doctor Who kind of British component that I saw in my head. And, they at that point were like, no, he's American. And I was like, okay. And we did our due diligence. We did a bunch of, obviously we as Tom knows, we did a lot of auditions, but ultimately it was when we realized that that history was our friend in terms of having him be British, and that it all kind of works out when you have the Revolutionary War and all of that, the confluence of those things coming together. Because I really, really believe in my heart that obviously, Tom, you were phenomenal in the show, but just that he really just needed to be British. I just couldn't imagine.
Well, I know a few of the actors who were chosen before me and all American, and it's hard to picture. Yeah. And I remember when I taped in London for it and was asked to do it both with a British and with an American accent. Yeah. And it then surprised me that it took so long for everyone to realize he should be British, because it just didn't.
Nope.
It's going to sound very pretentious, but it just didn't feel right. It didn't fit.
The verbiage coming out of his mouth, we did many auditions, and every time, and at his interrogation, Ichabod's interrogation scene was the audition scene. That was what actors, as I'm sure you remember, Tom, was what you were auditioning with. And the very first line is, "My name is Ichabod Crane." I can't tell you how many actors said Ichabod Crane, like just just straight out said Ichabod. So like they're dead in the water before they've even started, they're dead. And then they go and everyone did it like Christian Bale and Batman. Everyone delivered these lines with this like gruff, weird, gritty authority, as though, which again shows they don't know the character, obviously, because they don't know his name, but they also just don't have like any, context for it. And to your point, a British accent, first of all, makes everything just sound better, but also just it creates a level of authority or a level of wit and intelligence. Whether or not you have any of that, Tom, is yet to be determined. But I do think that Brits do convey that.
Tom, wait, I'm so embarrassed. I watch every episode of this show and you're really good in it, but I can't remember. Did you do an American accent in Watchmen?
No. Oh,
no,
sorry.
No, in Watchmen.
So how is your American accent?
Well, I'm doing it in C, and no one's punched me yet.
Okay,
but mind you, I'm surrounded by Canadians, so
and you don't want to be punched by those guys. I think
not by fucking Bautista and
those are some good punchers.
I wanted to bring sorry, Kenny, I don't mean to cut you off, but the C accent, because I have watched a couple of the episodes of the new season, and it's an interesting accent, because I know that it is American, but it has the show is heightened,
slightly off,
right? Like there's something kind of off about it, right? Am I crazy? Okay.
Yes, that was one of those choices that I make where I want to do it a little bit off, and then realize after I've started doing that, it might just sound like I can't do an American accent. Oh shit! Well, it's too late now. In for a penny, in for a pound. Here we go.
It's great. Sometimes I do like it.
Sometimes you make choices, and in your head it's really clever, but in practice you're just a bad actor.
So let's go a little further on this, and we can relate it to the Burton movie.
Yeah.
So Tom, you got this. I don't really know how it worked. Did you get sides? Did you get a script? Did you get just kind of?
Did you get the whole thing, or did you just get sides? I don't remember.
No, I got the whole thing. I remember it was the first year that I had ever been up for pilots. I was never available before, and then I was like, yeah, send me everything. And so in London, it's not pilot season in quite the way that it was in LA, which mercifully I always managed to avoid. But I did love seeing the exodus of British actors going to LA for pilot season and coming back a month later, 10 grand poorer and still
in my head, I'm envisioning them all waving from a ship.
It's exactly that. And the rest of us who can't afford to go to LA, just blowing kisses and waving them off and saying, good luck, hoping, like in Good Will Hunting, that we'll never see them again and they'll just be very successful. Yeah. But then they all come back. And
it's not what I hope. I hope they give me a call and say, you want to do a guest spot?
Yeah, right.
I hope the fucking boat sinks.
But we sent you,
so
I
anyway,
remember seeing tape for you before you flew out here. Right?
Oh,
you went on tape and then you flew.
Yes,
out,
I did, because I got the whole script, lots of scripts, and this was just one of 7 or something that I was reading that week. Mm-hmm. And I remember finishing it and going into the kitchen, and my flatmate at the time, a guy called Nikesh Patel, who was in the terrible 4 weddings that I did. That I think
God.
Great. Love Nikesh. And he was like, are you okay? You look kind of fried. So I've just read this amazing script, and it's of the pile of really bad pilots. This is the only one that I really want, and there's no way I'm going to get it. I know that I won't get it, because it was the sort of part that I would never, ever have been cast in London. If it was an English production, I would never have got that part. I was like, but I love it. And I read him a bit, and it was a bit... In the pilot, obviously, you do scripts without thinking about the budget. And there was a helicopter flies in. It was the scene that was eventually, it was John Cho arresting me with the police car. Yeah. But it was a helicopter coming in. And we then spent an hour just pissing ourselves thinking of different ways to react to a helicopter, which was mainly high-pitched screaming and faint. So it's lucky that it was cut. And then I read it immediately again, which I don't really do with scripts very often, because I loved it. Then I went on tape one wet Wednesday morning, and I saw a couple of the actors who went in before me, and they were all a lot older than I was, 30 at the time, and they were in their 40s, and I was like, they're going to go for it. Big, gruff, 40-year-old, hardened looking men. So I went in and I did my Bryan Cranston impression for the American bit, and did my fruity old Mison for the British bit, and forgot about it. And that was it.
Well, I remember watching. It's funny because Tom and I were texting the other day. You texted me about. We were texting about my roommate Melissa. And what's funny about this, and the reason I bring this up is she knew exactly who you were because she loves British television, and British movies. And when I was being sent the various, reels or what have you, you came up and she's like, "Oh, he's great." I mean, and she like rattled off a bunch of your credits. And my apologies, I didn't know you at the time, but I'm sorry.
You knew Melissa at the time?
Sure.
Wow, you guys have been friends forever.
So she. Yes.
Well, this is what the people are tuning in for, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Chat about your flatmates.
But long story short, the reason I bring this up is because I remember seeing the reel. I remember thinking that you were great. I remember that people were like, he needs to grow a beard. I remember that because you were just very clean and you looked very young.
And the thing is, I always have a beard. My wife hates me without a beard. And I remember saying to her, I'm so sorry, I should probably trim it down for this audition. And so I did that just for the audition and hated it.
Oh wow.
And then you grew it, and they said grow it so that when you get here for the camera test, you'll have, and you had some gruff. You didn't have what you have now, but you had like some and I remember, we all remember, when you tested with Nicole, and it was like pretty instantaneous. There was something there that was just really
They also
special.
said grow your beard and bring like a big military coat. Yeah. And I had a big military coat, but with buttons missing. Mm-hmm. And I was going to fly out 2 days after getting the call.
Yeah.
And they sent me, like, it was a 5-hour screen test, wasn't it? So there were like 4
you
or 5.
You tested by yourself.
There was fucking loads. Yeah. There was loads to learn. And instead of learning it, I spent the entire 2 days and the flight looking for buttons that matched the buttons I had on the coat. I couldn't find buttons that matched, so I just bought 6 new buttons that look vaguely military, and then spent the 11-hour flight, cutting off the buttons and sewing new buttons on. And then landed in LA, and it was like, well, shit, I have no idea of my lines. I'll get straight to the hotel,
right,
and I'll start learning my lines. And walked out of the airport.
So faster.
I'm a very good
sewer. It's an 11-hour flight.
I mean, I may have exaggerated that a little bit.
I'm not a great sewer, but that's not going to take me 11 hours, I promise.
Anyway, I got to the airport, and in my head, everyone who comes over, who is called over for a screen test, I'd never done it before. And I thought, you get out of the airport and there's a stretch limo with a glass of champagne in the back and someone will pick you up. I turn up and I have no idea how to get to my hotel. There's no car. And I had, from a previous trip to America, I had about $7 in my pocket. And so I don't know the address of the hotel, and I can't get a taxi because I have zero money in my bank. And so I went to the ATM to try and get money out to get a taxi. It was like, you've been doing fucking theatre for 4 years. And I was scared. And couldn't get to the hotel. And it was, then it was about 8 in the evening. Mm-hmm. And I had to get my big military coat on.
I remember...
Pull my suitcase. Someone had to give me directions to the nearest bus terminal to LAX. And I remembered vaguely where the hotel was from the last time I was in LA. I couldn't drive, so I was getting buses everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I remembered the bus. And I think it was 1-3 something that went straight past Century City. And I knew that that's where the hotel was. And I knew that it ended in Santa Monica. And I knew the point that the bus stop is. So I had to go to a bus terminal, try and find the bus that would take me to Santa Monica, then try and find, using the power of my brain, the right bus stop and get on another bus and go to... And by then I had... 4 hours before it was time to
I do remember, obviously I remember the test. I remember you tested by yourself first without Nicole.
That's
then
right.
You and I went for lunch at the commissary.
Yeah.
And I remember, which was lovely. We talked about David Bowie and Radiohead, and it was lovely.
That's right.
And then you tested with Nicole for us. We thought it was great. We recorded that, and then we showed that to the network a few days later. And they obviously were like, this is great.
It wasn't a few days later, because I remember leaving and thinking, nah, didn't get it.
Really?
Maybe it was. I was convinced. I don't remember. And so I went down, because I was due to fly back home the next day. And so I left and I was like, well, it's been fun. It's been an experience. I got to see the buses again. And I had a really nice time doing the test. Fine. So well, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to do what you're not allowed to do as an actor in LA. I'm going to go out and I'm going to get absolutely shit-faced and have a burger and fries. And, And just as I was taking a bite into my burger, I got a call from my agent saying, you've been offered it and you're not going home tomorrow and we need your passport and you're going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina in 10 days.
Yeah. And so I want to tell one very... funny story about when we were shooting the pilot. It was a couple days in, and I remember, generally speaking, Kenny, you know this, but generally speaking, cast is shuttled back and forth from the hotel to set, whatever. And a couple days in, you came up to me and you were like, hey, do you want to drive me to set? Like, do you want to just like, we'll just listen to music, we'll go to set
Yeah,
together?
it was like an hour-long drive up to...
Yeah, and I was just like, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I would love to do that. So I drive you to set, and then I get to set, and one of the producers takes me aside and is like, you can't just take the lead actor. You can't just like, kidnap him and go wherever you want with him. Like, he has to be at a certain place at a certain time. So that was one of the lessons that I learned shooting this. But I do have a question for you.
That's a Teamster issue right there. You're running afoul of some people you don't want to run afoul of.
Yeah. My question to you is this: when this project comes to you, did you watch the movie? Did you think about the Johnny Depp performance?
Say, yes.
Did this influence you in any way, shape, or form? Interesting.
No.
So you didn't want to be influenced by it.
No, mainly because in the UK, we don't read the book because it's not. I understand why it's considered a classic in America, and but no, you mention Sleepy Hollow and people just go, Johnny Depp.
Right.
Johnny Depp. And so if I say there's a TV show based on Sleepy Hollow, I'm like, oh, are you Johnny Depp? Are you Johnny Depp? And it's, that's their big boots.
Well, so I want to unpack this in the sense that I want to talk about the role of Ichabod Crane and sort of in the Disney film, he is this weird, tall, lanky teacher with like a receding hairline and a giant nose, and he just looks like
I've only seen that since doing the show. I only watched it recently.
That is the Ichabod Crane that most people associated prior to this movie coming out. Then this movie comes out. Johnny Depp apparently specifically asked that he wanted to do the makeup. He wanted a giant nose. He wanted the receding hairline. He wanted all this shit. And the studio was like, no, we paid for Johnny Depp's face and we're not interested in caking it in some weird shit. So he wasn't able to hide behind his usual accoutrement that he's so adept at doing. But then this becomes Ichabod Crane, right? Like, this is the Johnny Depp's performance, for all intents and purposes, really becomes sort of the definition of the role. So
in America, this overtook the cartoon, did it?
Without question.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
The cartoon persists only as a ride at Disneyland and Disney World. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is a ride people go on, and it's a ride that's been there for 50 plus years. As a film, it is not important in the Disney canon. Nobody shows this film to people.
Well, because it's a short too, right? Like, I think it was clumped with something else. I think there were like two things that it was part of. I could be totally wrong.
I don't know, but to be honest with you, Phil, I never even considered showing it to my kids, and they have seen everything. So I might now,
but it does feel like Johnny's performance certainly is like the thing, right? Now,
the other thing I want to say about Sleepy Hollow in general is I grew up 15 minutes from Sleepy Hollow, from the town of Sleepy Hollow. It was called something different when I forgot what it was called when I was a kid. It
is called something else. Hold on.
Well, it used to be it's not Ossining, which still exists, but it was called something different. And then around 99 or so, they changed the name back to Sleepy Hollow.
Wow.
And even as someone who grew up 15 minutes,
Tarrytown is what it was, in the village of Tarrytown, North Tarrytown. I think
Tarrytown still exists, but North Tarrytown might have been what it was, and North Tarrytown might have changed their name to Sleepy Hollow.
Correct.
To capitalize on this. But even as someone who lived 15 minutes, this was not something we learned. This was not local lore. This was it's not even a thing. It's certainly not a book we read. It's something you're vaguely aware of. Like, the Headless Horseman is a Halloween character. Much like Michael Myers is a Halloween character.
See, I always thought that the book was kind of one of those school books that everyone is made to read. Really?
Definitely not. No. Not when you're young, not when you're old, but maybe around Halloween.
And yet the Headless Horseman is such an enduring...
And the character, Ichabod Crane, which is such an interesting name. It's a name that obviously stands out. You've got Rip Van Winkle as well, which is also an interesting name. Like, I do think that Washington Irving unintentionally stumbled across these weird iconic things.
Yeah, they're kind of this, American lore that kind of exists the way Paul Bunyan exists or Johnny Appleseed exists. These aren't things that you ever read. They're just kind of things that you're aware of,
Yep, totally. And I think that, so, I mean, back to sort of my original question to you, Tom, which is, you saw this film in 99. Do you want to relay to us the story of seeing this film in 99?
In the cinema. One of the few films,
in Woking?
the only of the films that we've done. Not in Woking. I went to see it in Richmond in London. And
never been there.
With Emily Blunt, who I was at school with. And I had no idea whether it was a date. I didn't think it was a date, but I've since found out it may well have been a date. I had no idea.
It's your sliding doors moment, Tom. That's your moment.
Oh, man.
You don't know it, but like...
Well, but it shows quite how bad I always was with girls. We went out for dinner and a film,
sure.
And I didn't know if it was a date or not. But I do remember I sat on a fruit pastel and ruined my trousers. And that, honestly, is the enduring thought whenever anyone mentions Sleepy Hollow, the film. Even doing the show, anyone mentions Sleepy Hollow, I think, I loved those trousers.
That's fantastic. That's. I mean, so did Emily like the film? Do you remember if you guys?
I remember we both enjoyed the film. I loved Tim Burton at the time. I was really obsessed with Tim Burton.
Well, this also has a deep bench of British actors, of tremendous British actors.
The best.
So, which is part of this whole sort of, milieu that Burton is playing in with this film, which is that it is sort of this old Hammer film styled film in terms of having this like kind of, a whodunit at the center of it and a sort of murder mystery mixed into it.
Yeah, people tend to think of Burton as being kind of light horror, but actually this is really the only one of his films that is actively a horror.
Well, I think that you're tapping into something that I think is interesting, which is the misnomer of Gothic and horror. Those are two different things. Right. And I think that he's definitely a Gothic filmmaker who loves the aesthetic that comes with that. But he's not like he even says it himself, like, this was my first horror film. And quite honestly, I think his last. If you consider Sweeney Todd a horror film, I don't know. But it does feel like he was dipping his toes into something that he had never done before. But it is interesting how watching this again yesterday, and I don't know if you felt this way, Kenny, but like it's a very bloody movie. I mean, it is a horror film, in terms of it's not scary, but it is playing in horror tropes, and it is playing in that sort of Hammer horror films, obviously, of that period.
And then you cast, Christopher Lee and Michael Gough, and then you've got.
And Michael Chambon and like Richard Griffiths. And it's just like you've got this crazy. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, Kenny.
No, I don't know. It's a horror film, I guess.
Thank you.
But it's too lush. It's too lush to be scary. It's
beautiful. It's too beautiful.
The production value is there's too much money being spent, and it is too well done and beautiful to actually be scary. I know that sounds like weird. Like
there are scary moments. Like
there's a couple jump scares.
Jump scares, fine.
Yeah.
But it was when after the first time he sees the horseman, I think it was, and they're walking back across the bridge.
Yeah.
And they hear the footsteps behind them, and he's not there, and then suddenly he's on top. That was my favorite moment. I loved that. And that was genuinely scary. And a lot more than, hacking and...
the blood is so unrealistic looking, intentionally so. Like, it does feel as though they're...
Apparently, Tom Stoppard came in to doctor the script.
He did it
specifically to make it...
rewrite. Yeah.
Yes, but with particular emphasis on bringing down the violence.
Yes. Andrew Kevin Walker's script, which I have not read, but I can only assume, considering what he also wrote in 1999, Fight Club and 8mm, my assumption is that it was a dark movie. And I think that yes. I think that once Tim Burton came in, this is the other thing too, where it's like Tim Burton's still kind of, you know, a 4-quadrant filmmaker. Like, he's not an idiot. He still wants to make movies for as many people as he possibly can. So like, he knows that Andrew Kevin Walker's Sleepy Hollow script is not going to cut it. Like, that's not going to get where I need to go. But I also think what's interesting too is as is the case with Burton, certainly, you know, spotty here and there, but he's an homage filmmaker, right? Like, if you look at Ed Wood is obviously a Valentine to Ed Wood. Mars Attacks is basically an Ed Wood movie if he got $50 million to make a movie. This is a Hammer film love letter to all those horror films that he loved as a kid. So like, because there's that loving kind of quality that you're talking about, Kenny, it makes it less scary, right? Like, there's too much care being put into it.
And then you add something brilliantly, Burton, where when a head's cut off, it spins round. It spins round on their head before falling off, which I think is brilliant. And that's such a good way. If you don't want it to be too gruesome, you add just a little element of Burton Gothic cartoon to
totally.
it.
There are two things at work here that, you know, a grown-up knows going into this movie. One is what we're saying. It's both what they're saying. It's the Tim Burton element, and it's the way it looks. And you know from the moment you're going in that they're not going to fuck you up. This isn't the Texas Chainsaw Massacre where you turn that on and you think, I could be fucked up. Like, this could fuck up my night or my life. But totally. You know, you don't know. And that's the thrill of it for me, which is like, I kind of want my life to be fucked up. But with Sleepy Hollow, you go and, you know, like, look, this movie, it made $200 million?
It made $200 million.
Made $200 million for a reason.
What was the budget?
70. So one
yeah, it's a PG-13 movie. I mean, Rollins is. I mean, my son is such a nut. He's literally sitting there with his phone, looking up, and he goes, well, all right. This says it's for 12 plus. Like, I'll be fine. He's 9. He said, this is for 12 plus. Like, I guess I guess I will lower myself and watch this child movie with you, Dad.
I do want to very quickly give a synopsis for the people who haven't seen Sleepy Hollow. It's set in 1799 based on Washington Irving's classic
Like they're
tale.
Still listening.
They're listening. Ichabod Crane is sent to Sleepy Hollow to the decapitations of 3 people, with the culprit being the legendary apparition, the Headless Horseman. Sleepy Hollow opened on November 19th, 1999, in second place behind The World Is Not Enough. I'm assuming you all that opening weekend, Tom? I can only assume.
I did.
Maybe? I'm sure you did.
Yeah, I did.
And ahead of Pokemon, The Bone Collector, and Dogma. That's a murderer's row right there. That's a really interesting weekend.
We've done them all.
It would go on to make $207 million on a $70 million budget. It has 69% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 80% from audiences. Roger Ebert gave the film 3.5 stars, saying Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow begins with a story that would not have distinguished one of the lesser films from the Hammer horror franchise and elevates it to sheer style and acting into something entertaining and sometimes rather elegant. The best looking horror film since Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. What it depends upon is Burton's gift for effects and a superb performance by Johnny Depp, who discards everything we may have ever learned or thought about it from scratch. The ending is perhaps too traditional. Burton at least doesn't linger over this or exploit it. He's too much in love with his moody setup to ruin the fun with final overkill. The most astonishing thing for me about the movie wasn't the Horseman anyway, but the fact that I actually found myself drawn into this old classics illustrated material, enthralled by a time and place so well evoked that the Horseman almost seemed natural there. Then he has a note at the end of his review where he says, "No power on earth could drag from me the identity of the unbilled actor who plays the Horseman when he has a head. You will agree he is the only logical choice." Which I'm like, okay. I mean, Chris Walken's inspired casting, but great overplaying your hand. Great team. Yeah.
If you're going to have an actor who isn't going to say a word, but is going to bring so much to the very end when he throws Miranda onto the front of his horse.
And the bite with the blood, the kiss.
The bite with the blood, but before that, the sort of, it's threatening, but it's sexually suggestive. Coming with me. It's so much in one look, and it's genuinely brilliant. I have no idea how he did it, and no one else other than Walken could do that.
It's fantastic.
Max Shrek Walken,
like the best.
Him leaning into that wild-eyed, wild-haired thing that he's allowed. I think that's really what to do. But
well, it's what I love about this is he's cast as this horseman, gets to set and says, "I don't know how to ride a horse." So, is
that true?
It's true. So all of his
is that a shock?
It's not a surprise to me, but I just love that. To be perfectly honest, it actually works. The style of it. When you see that flashback of him and he's on horseback and he's like, slashing away at all those soldiers, it's all silhouette basically anyway. It doesn't matter that he's on a hobby horse or he's on some sort of a fucking whatever. Like it doesn't matter. And it's just, I don't know. I think it adds to the style of it. I think it adds to the campiness that exists with this. The tone that Burton's trying to do. Time Magazine says something which said Burton's richest, prettiest, weirdest film since Batman Returns. The simple story bends to his twist, freeing him for an extra. I do think that this is, and I forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think the film of his that has ever won an Academy Award. It won Best Production Design, as it rightly should. It's one of the most exquisite looking films I've ever seen, even to this day. Almost 90% of this film was shot on sound stages. So if you think about a horse at full gallop running inside,
I remember someone during Sleepy Hollow telling me that they built the entire forest in the biggest soundstage in the world in London. And they built a track in a circle. So that you can pop the camera right in the middle and have the horseman leading it around this circle. And if you follow it in the right way, then it's doing a tracking shot, a straight track.
It's incredible.
So brilliant.
Completely inspiring.
I mean, part of this too is Emmanuel Lubezki shoots this film, who is obviously one of the greatest cinematographers that's ever been. And, so for him, I imagine this was just a blast, right? He got to play in a whole new sandbox with all the toys and all the stuff that he wanted to do, but it's all forced perspective. Whenever you've got these big wide shots of the hills and what have you, it's all smoke and forced perspective. So it looks like it's just this gargantuan thing that it's not. Really the only exteriors are of the town, which they built in like the woods or out in, wherever the hell they built it. It's just an exquisite, and the costumes, like everything about this to me is just, anyone who works in below the line, this is just a heralded movie.
Which is why it's so successful. I think it's entirely down to that, because when you've got something silly as a headless horseman and the type of story that they're doing, you have to be you have to create a very real world, even though it's in a heightened Gothic world. You believe it. And it's very telling that I've got my little notepad.
Yeah.
Which I've been doing. I've got all of the podcast like it's that we've done, starting back.
You could put it in our podcast like it's museum someday.
And for this film, I've got like one page because I just completely lost myself in it.
Yeah, I know. It's a swift 100 minutes. It doesn't overstay its welcome. There's always something happening. It always feels as though there's a twist or a turn or there's something. And perhaps, to your ultimate point, it pulls you in. The world is so beautiful and captivating that you're just sucked into it, that it's hard not to just, it flies by. It really does.
I'll never get bored of fruity old Brits giving guilty looks at each other.
There's a lot of them in this. There's so many pregnant pauses and looks towards its.
And when you give that to like Gambon and Richard Griffiths, they're gonna chew it up.
It's even just like there's so many obviously great moments in this, but I think Gambon's death is one of my favorites because he's in a church, he's standing on this pulpit, he's screaming about conspiracy and that someone's coming for him, and then a fucking picket fence flies through the stained glass window through his chest and just pulls him right out of the fucking church. And he's just like, you can tell that all of them are having so much fun, just absolutely hamming it up. They're all just.
This is the thing is when you have a script like this, and you know it's a director like Tim Burton, and you know that it's going to have, Danny Elfman making it sound amazing, and you've got Lubezki is going to make it look amazing. Yeah. You could get any actor in the world. There's not a single actor in the world who wouldn't want to be a part of it.
So before we dive into the plot and get to our Tim Burton picks, I want to ask you about the question that was sort of, as I was watching Sleepy Hollow, I was thinking about it, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. It's sort of the idea of the tactile versus the CGI, right? Like, this movie is incredibly tactile, right? Obviously there's some CG effects of a horse diving out of a tree, for instance, or Chris Walken's face, what have you. But what did you guys, and actually, Kenny, I'm curious as to if your son even tracked this as well, but like that idea of there's a generation of people, of kids now that like nothing is fucking built, right? Like everything is in front of a fucking green screen. So did he clock the fact that like this was a forest and this was a horse and like all this stuff was like real? Did you guys feel like it had... it's one of the things I love about this movie, but I guess I'm just wondering what you guys felt about it.
I don't remember. Cool. I could speak kind of generally because I remember my son not saying anything about it.
Right.
And he is a smart aleck in that he will immediately call out bad CG. He'll immediately call out bad practical effects. He really gets off on that. And that is not what happened watching this film. So
that says something.
It's always more satisfying, but it might be because, we're of the generation that didn't have good CG. But because I was thinking about it, watching it, that Tim Burton and Terry Gilliam are two examples of directors who work so much better when they don't have CG.
I was thinking
when they have to be creative and artistic and have it there, it's infinitely better and infinitely more suited to their style.
Because there's a lot of people that feel like this is the movie, the last great Tim Burton movie, right? Like that he kind of goes off of a cliff at this point because, Alice in Wonderland is an abomination of a movie. And part of it is because you're just inundated with this very fake looking world in a way that is just feels antithetical to his work. Like that's what's so interesting to me is that I guess, even Dumbo, which I think is maybe the best iteration of that for him, but still it's just like it's missing that tangible kind of feeling.
Yeah, and actually we watched, my son and I, he's 6, not that long ago, we watched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Sure.
The film. And one of my favorite books, and the film is, it's not the book or the TV series or the radio show. It's at the bottom of the Hitchhiker's list. But we loved it, and we loved it because the Vogons are there. They built the suits, and Marvin is there walking around with them. And so my son was obsessed with it because of that. He loved that you can tell that there's people in a room with a depressed robot, and that's a lot funnier and a lot better than if it was, a CG one. Also, just look at The Mandalorian. Who's the most popular character in genre of the last 5-10 years, and it's Baby Yoda. And you might know this story, but he was going to be CG Baby Yoda, and only fractionally they'd have the little puppet. And it was the first time, Baby Yoda's first outing was with Werner Herzog in one of his scenes. And they said, halfway through, they did his stuff, and they said, okay, get rid of the puppet and bring in the balls and we'll do CG. And Herzog was like, what? And stopped them and was like, what the fuck are you doing? And they said, well, it's going to be mainly CG. It's this puppet. And he went berserk and called them fucking cowards, is his exact words. If you're doing CG, you're fucking cowards. And persuaded them to do the whole thing.
That's fantastic. That's the best thing. That's fantastic.
I want to get into this a little more because this is kind of fascinating too. I love him,
Werner,
the hero. But I'm a little fascinated by this because what you're saying is, demonstrably true. Burton's work falls off right around this point, and look, Planet of the Apes was not CG. Planet of the Apes was pretty tactile as well, but
Phil, that face at the mention of Planet of the Apes, because
it's the moment when I was like, oh no, what?
But there's something here that I want to kind of hone in on, which is it's not the practical effects and the physical costumes that make Burton's work. It's the stories. There's something else going on here. So why can't he also find a good script or a workable, exciting script that works in CG? We've all seen films that rely heavily on CG, including movies in 1999, that are incredible, that work really well. So what is it about Burton that makes it, because it's not, to me, it's not just that you can't touch it.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's we all know that what ends up on the screen is often wildly different to what is on the page. And when you're doing CG, you have to hand it over to other people. You explain it as best as you can, but at the end of the day, it's people with a computer. Whereas Tim Burton, who has always been an artist and drawn and made things, if it's practical and it's there, he can work it.
Yeah,
and he has complete control. So it's definitely his story being told in the way that he wants it to tell, rather than people. You get the wrong guy.
That's a really excellent point.
I think it's very much. I think that's absolutely
true. You
answered
the question perfectly.
I think that the fulcrum point for him is actually Mars Attacks, which is that he wanted the Martians to be stop motion, and Warner Brothers was like, no.
Really,
give it a shot.
Fucking cowards.
Kind of cowardly.
Yeah, but they threw a MacBook at him and said, "Nah, you're using this."
But I think the aliens or the Martians in Mars Attacks are fantastic. They're the best part of that movie. And I think that ultimately, when push comes to shove, that was the moment when he was like, oh, wait a second, I can do stuff I want to do with computer generated effects. Then he goes and he develops, because as I'm sure you guys know, maybe you don't know, he spent many years developing Superman Lives. He was supposed to make a Superman movie with Nicolas Cage playing Superman. There's a whole documentary and footage of it. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it because it's real weird. And I don't know what that movie was going to be, but it was going to be a lot of CG. And it was going to be a very his most overtly sci-fi thing. It might have been the end of his career, quite frankly. I'm not sure that movie would have worked. But that movie hits the skids and he basically jumps into Sleepy Hollow immediately after that, which is the exact opposite. And I think there's something to be said for a guy who spent 2 years developing a movie that was going to be mostly computer generated into a Hammer film love letter to those horror films that's entirely on sound stages, that has very little computer generated effects, and that it is one of his best films, because I think, to what you guys are saying, there is a love for him being like, I can see this, I can touch this, I understand this in a way that maybe he doesn't with CGI. And Alice in Wonderland being the prime example of what happens when he just goes way too far down the other road. But to your point, Kenny, I agree with you. A story is a story is a story.
Yeah. Well, no, I think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is pretty revolting as well.
For many reasons.
Like truly physically difficult to stomach. And a lot of that is due to the copious use of CGI when it shouldn't have been. But
and Johnny Depp's performance, which was apparently inspired by Michael Jackson and Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, we definitely hung out with Oscar Wilde. What a
it's ridiculous.
What
a pretentious thing.
Because Burton has such a distinct style and such a look, and I mean the fact that you can describe things as Burton-esque. There aren't very many people who actually have their own word. So, from an actor's point of view, to be able to actually inhabit that world is brilliant. And so that's what, watching Sleepy Hollow, I thought, how fun to actually go and be in the village. He gets to design a village, and the village is built, and there's a guy running around, dressed as a headless horseman, and that's what you want to do. That's what you don't want to be in front of a green screen.
A green screen. Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, obviously as an actor, not to ask an obvious question, but like, it doesn't compare, right? I mean, like when you have to essentially just imagine something in front of you as opposed to seeing the fucking thing, like there's just no question what you would prefer.
Yeah, easily.
So in terms of the actors, Johnny Depp was always the first choice. But the studio
so I just want to ask one more kind of general question about the CGI versus physical locations. Could he do it today? Because the story is now there's a two-part question. The story is always what you just said in terms of Mars Attacks. He wants to do it a certain way. The studio demands that it's CG. Okay, so if we assume that the studio would allow it, which is its own question, would the public accept it? Would a public accept a Sleepy Hollow-esque or Ed-Wood-esque
I think so.
Edward Scissorhands-esque world?
I think so.
So why don't we try? Is I guess my question.
Because probably the answer to the first bit of the question, whether the studio would allow it, is no.
I think that if tomorrow, if this version didn't exist and Tim Burton went to a studio today and said, I want to make a Sleepy Hollow movie, I think he probably could still do what he wants to do. This movie's budget, which is on the higher end of things, I think ultimately he still would have got it made. I think to your greater point, Kenny, is that 99.9% of this industry wouldn't allow it to get made. I think that probably the closest thing that I can think of recently is The Green Knight. David Lowery was given, $20-30 million to make a pretty alienating film about a knight.
I thought he got a lot more. I thought he got a lot more money than that, but
maybe I'm wrong. But I don't know how much it got in terms of budget. But it's a gorgeous film. Love that it exists. I actually think that Blank Check did an episode on Sleepy Hollow, and David Lowery was their guest on that episode, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Like, I think that Sleepy Hollow is definitely a touchstone for Green Knight in a lot of ways. But that's an anomaly, to your point, Kenny, right? Like The Green Knight, one of the reasons why people are so excited about it is because it feels so unlike anything out there right now.
I was right. It's not 20 and 30. It's only 15. So, I'm right again over here. Lowery,
just like your wife.
Interestingly enough, David Lowery made had a really great use of CG in Pete's Dragon.
He did. Yeah.
That really does kind of meet you in the middle, totally. And that dragon feels like a real creature. So he's a special filmmaker in his own right. But
for sure. And I think that, I mean, not to state the obvious, but I do think that A24 as a studio is going out of its way to nurture these types of voices, nurture these people that are trying to make films that, quite frankly, we were making far more often 20, 30 years ago. But I do think it's interesting, Kenny. You're not wrong. We're not. And
we're not
part
trying.
Of it's
we're a bunch of cowards.
We are a bunch of cowards. I mean, just look at what J.J. Abrams did with the first. I mean, he was adamant that the first Star Wars, that Force Awakens, have as much practical effects as possible, practical makeup, practical creatures. And they pushed back on it. And they were just like, but it's like they learned nothing from the prequels. But anyway, I digress. I wanted to mention some of the actors that the studio essentially, I don't want to say forced, but wanted Tim Burton to talk with about Ichabod. Liam Neeson, Brad Pitt, and Daniel Day-Lewis. very much would have loved to have seen Daniel Day-Lewis's Ichabod Crane. Sure, would have been here for it.
Brad Pitt too.
But obviously, I think it was always going to be Johnny Depp. I don't think that anybody questioned that. I want to kind of let's jump through the plot here a little bit. There's not listen, people know The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. There's not a tremendous amount of stuff we need to talk about in terms of the plot, but there's some things that I did kind of want to talk about a little bit. I want to talk about the opening portion of this film, which was a studio note and was not how the film originally opened. The film originally opened with Ichabod in New York finding the body before he gets sent to Sleepy Hollow. So that whole Martin Landau opening, who's great, Martin Landau should be in everything, or rest in peace, but you know my point. That whole opening was because they wanted essentially a cold open for a television show, right? Like they wanted a cool opening that saw the horseman, that saw somebody get beheaded, and they sort of retroactively added that in there. What I love about it is it's a silent movie. Like the first 7 to 10 minutes of the film are just and bordering on black and white as well. I mean, this movie's very monochromatic, intentionally so, but it's beautifully shot. That whole opening I just absolutely adore. And obviously, the Martin Landau thing is a nice nod to Ed Wood and what have you. But what did you guys think of the opening?
I didn't know that it was an option to have not started with that, to have started with him in New York, because that would make no sense. It would have been a boring way to start. Totally. Whereas if you're going into this, brilliantly imaginative world, go straight in at the deep end.
Totally.
And then do a little bit of the fucking character stuff.
I'm also I don't know about you guys, but I love a movie that doesn't give me a title until a good 10 minutes into the film.
Oh, me too. Me too. The later the better. When a movie title comes up at the end of a film before the credits, I find that deeply satisfying.
You're like,
I love that. That is a great feeling. That's such a triumphant feeling when the title only comes up when the movie ends. You're like, yeah. When I watched the first episode of Squid Game, I wanted that, but instead I just shouted, Squid Game!
Amazing. So we get to Sleepy Hollow. We meet our whole cast of characters. We have a great scene where Ichabod meets all of the various nefarious British actors that they've decided to put all in one room. And it's like Clue. It's like he's just sitting there and he's doing like Columbo as he's walking around them and pretending like I think it's fantastic. I also and this is I imagine the Tom Stoppard stuff of the fact that anytime there's a shot of a book or the inside of a book, it's basically telling you everything that's about to come ahead from. Like, it's all just like, if you're paying attention to anything, we're telling you everything as it's about to come. Right. Then we get the flashback of Chris Walken as the horseman, which is great, with his sharpened teeth.
Great teeth.
Just all of it's just great. Obviously, we see the little girl breaking the stick, which calls back, obviously, at the end when we realize who that little girl is. We talked a little bit about this, but I want to underline it again just one more time. Every time we see a horse running a full gallop, it is inside a soundstage. Now, I don't know if you guys have been in a soundstage, but it's the idea of it is terrifying to me because it's not that big a space. Like, if you're lucky, it's relatively big, but it's filled with all these stages. So like it's not, or sets and what have you. So it's really not that spacious. The idea of a horse running full gallop down a soundstage is terrifying to me, but I think it's amazing. We should talk a little about Ichabod's steampunky kind of component. His
that was actually one of the few notes that I put. And I thought that's where it got, that was a Burtonism too far for me.
Okay.
I mean, it's since become, iconic. And it's the image of the film is him with those big, and there was another example later on, but it kind of sticks out when you've got this really, really weird world.
Yeah, you
don't need to then add on something. It didn't seem right. It seemed like something that they thought was a bit of a joke,
Yeah, it definitely feels like wouldn't it be cool? And then you're like, but would it? You know,
because everything else is cool enough. They don't need. Yeah. I've never heard the saying "hat on a hat," but you're right. It's that.
Mm-hmm. It's
You only need one hat.
One hat, and
it's true.
Their hat's great.
Yeah, that hat works. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. This time around, I did find myself. There's also like, it's revealed too. Like they make a big. He kind of goes down and he pulls them back on his face in such an exaggerated fashion that you're just like, all right, like
you know, they were doing it and they could picture a cinema full of people pissing themselves. That was definitely a Groucho Marx little holding his cigar and raising his eyebrows at the camera type moment.
It definitely feels that way for sure. The other, I think, one of the most iconic images, I would say, from Sleepy Hollow just across the board is the pumpkin on fire being thrown at him. Mm-hmm. It's such a great, like, it's the whole thing, right? Like that is, if you're thinking about Sleepy Hollow, that's the thing. The flashbacks, I'm curious what you guys thought about the flashbacks of young Ichabod. And
well, listen, I can tell you that when you've got a character like Ichabod Crane, don't fuck about with family stuff.
Like James Bond. Don't tell me about James Bond's parents. I don't care.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or
especially
Freddy,
if anyone in the
Freddy
family are
Krueger's.
witches, you know.
Exactly.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it. I will say that seeing Lisa Marie in this really hammers home that Tim Burton's got a type. You've got Lisa Marie.
Yeah.
You've got Helena Bonham Carter. Now Ava Green. Like, it's just like, we get it, man. Like, you definitely,
I also kind of think they conform to a type. I don't know if Ava Green was that before she got into the, the Burton household.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, she was like, okay, so this is the role I have to play now.
Yeah. It's like, you've seen the pictures of Brad Pitt with all his girlfriends, how he's like human tofu and just becomes his girlfriends.
Yeah, just copies his girlfriends. Human tofu is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I've never heard that before. Yeah, he really is. It's crazy.
I use it to describe one of my children. I won't tell you which one.
Oh boy! All right. So I have a question for you, Tom, about Johnny's performance. Do you feel that it is like, I think it's a funny performance, right? Like, I think when he's leaning into the cowardly, I'm a coward, I'm scared of my own shadow. He faints like 10 times in this movie. What are your feelings about it? Do you think it's a little too much? Like, no. It doesn't bother me necessarily, but I'm just curious as to what you think.
No, I think it's pretty well placed, because it's tricky that he's, his Ichabod is bright, going into a world that he doesn't quite believe in.
Yeah.
But at the center of, if you're doing it according to the book, he's a coward. But you can't be a cowardly detective. It doesn't really work. That really wouldn't work. So ignoring the cowardice for a bit and focusing on, he's just someone who's perpetually puzzled and trying to work things out. And then just allowing the cowardice to come out through fainting really well as well.
He does. He keels over a lot of spins and falls.
It's brilliant. And then that's everything that you need to know about him. It's not that he's a scaredy cat. It's just that his body switches off.
Love that.
When something frightening happens.
The moment when the headless horseman flies out of the tree, when he sees the tree open up, the tree of the dead or the tree of death or whatever they're calling it, and the horseman literally like
tree of souls.
Anyway, it makes me think about a moment when we were working on the pilot of the show, because I remember it was myself and Bob and Alex and Len, and we were sitting there, and I can't remember if it was Alex or Bob, but one of them wanted the horseman to kind of breach out of the water, like basically just like to literally like fly out of the water full thing. And I remember Len saying, yeah, that's a movie idea. That's not a TV idea. which I just think is, I mean, and it does show the difference, right? Like, I mean, putting all of the streaming stuff aside and the budgets that a lot of these shows get nowadays, it is interesting that like television is just more intimate. It's smaller. That's not a bad thing, but like you can't do some of these crazy effects things that at least on broadcast. But
I mentioned earlier we had in the original script there was a helicopter that comes and chases.
Yes.
But there was a bit where the horseman rides his horse over a car.
Yeah.
Jumping over a police car, and
what did the helicopter become?
Probably
it was just like, I think it was like a police cruiser that shoots at them.
It was a bike. It was a man on a bike.
It was basically that. I mean, it's one of the greatest things about working with Bob and Alex is that they just go for it, and they're just like, and then we'll do this and this. I'm like, listen, guys, if we can do it, let's do it. But I mean, crazy stuff. It's
like my favorite Entourage story when we wrote in Leonardo DiCaprio, assuming we can get him, and went all the way down and wound up casting Queen Latifah.
If that's not a perfect distillation of Hollywood, I don't know what is.
Yep, that was season 7 on Entourage.
Wow.
The town really told us where we stood.
I want to talk about one of my favorite images of the whole movie, and it's one of the first things I remember seeing from the movie, which is that when the trailer dropped, there's a little boy and a lantern in his bedroom, and there's these beautiful shadows that are being cast from this lantern. It's like kind of like almost like a zoetrope, and you're seeing this horseman that's riding in the shadows all around his bedroom walls, and it's an exquisite image, even if it actually makes no fucking sense. Like if you look at it, you're like, he would be in the way of this, so like you couldn't actually physically have all of this stuff around. Like it actually doesn't logically make any sense.
But there's no shadow.
There's no shadow of the mother and the son, but doesn't matter. Point is, that whole sequence is exquisite. The way that it's lit is just absolutely gorgeous. And it's still happening while the mother is getting killed, and she's got this horseman that's cast across her as she's in the and then just that shot of the little boy looking up and seeing his mother's dead eyes through the slit in the floor. Like it's all really good shit.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then somehow the horseman then realizes that there's a boy.
It goes back and kills the kid.
Which then doesn't, wow. Which then, again, that doesn't make a great deal of sense because later on he doesn't really know who's around and where, and he doesn't clock in the denouement where he's looking for someone and doesn't know where they are, but he's aware of a child, But the great thing about this world is that I don't care.
Don't care.
I'm a fucking pedant, but I don't care in this film.
Well, it's interesting. You are underlining one of the bigger logical issues, I think, which is the horseman is only there to kill the people that he needs to kill, right? That he's been told to kill. There's no reason to kill the kid. Yes. Like it's not a witness, non-witness situation. It's about people that are know certain knowledge. The kid doesn't care if so your point is completely valid. I think Tim Burton just wanted to kill a kid. That's what I think.
Maybe Miranda Richardson fucking hated that kid.
Maybe
her
that
character
kid.
That's true too.
Shitbag. So write him in the Death Note book.
I will say, as much as I'm not a fan of the Ichabod backstory, and it's funny, Kenny, you bring up Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, another person I don't want to know anything about. I don't need backstory on fucking Willy Wonka, and I don't need a prequel with Timothy Chalamet as Willy Wonka.
Is so beautiful, though, isn't he?
He's a beautiful man. I'm not taking that away from him, but I don't need to see him.
So I've heard.
Is it just like
let him pop on his little hat and jump around, and I'll be happy with it.
That's what his agent said.
Yeah.
Let him put on his little hat. Let him pop around.
That's acting, though, isn't it? That's life we choose. You pop on a hat and jump about a bit and have a wonderful time, and then go home for a bath.
It's so hard to get a movie made.
Yep.
And it's so hard to nail the right thing for a reboot of a franchise or a reimagining of a franchise. And yet, this idea of let's take this, ineffable character and learn about where he came from happens all the time.
All the time.
Like fucking James Franco playing young Wizard of Oz. Come on.
I'm with you, Kenny. We talked about this a little bit when the first image dropped, I think the other day, Timothy, dressed up as Willy Wonka, looking like with them like just eye fucking the audience. Just like
the Wonka who fucks.
The Wonka who fucks is what America apparently wants. Yeah. So that being said, I agree with you, Kenny. I'm just like, who wanted this?
It's so hard to reboot these things, and these are such lame ideas. I think the thought process is, and by the way, they'll do it with Ichabod too. But I think the thought process is, if this succeeds, we have like 25 years of story before they get where they need to get. Yeah. But it never succeeds.
Also, when was the last big budget film that isn't
IP?
Is an original IP that you can think of?
Oh, Free Guy, the best one of them all.
But isn't that also just IP?
No, it's not.
I haven't seen it.
I've seen clips of that, and it's Deadpool again. It's a whole bunch of like references to a bunch of fucking things.
First of all, it's not references. Second of all, like that's ridiculous. You can't say it's IP because it's like other stuff. Everything's like something else. It is not IP. It is. He
literally has
not
a lightsaber.
Pre-sold.
Does he not? At one point,
at the end of the movie, they reach into all of this Disney IP. So because like they do in Fortnite or whatever. But that is not like for these weapons. But that's not what they're selling the movie on. And regardless, like the whole idea is it's not pre-sold. It's not a it's not a piece of IP. I don't know how else to put it.
Is it going to be the start of a franchise?
Probably, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
I'm not really disagreeing with you on this specific instance, Kenny. But in terms of like something that is completely in no way, shape, or form, some sort of is harder to find.
They try. The thing is, and this is why I'm so into Free Guy. They try every year, and they fail every year. And people on the internet are savage towards people who are actually trying to do things original, which is like my biggest fucking bet noir in this business.
Yeah.
When people actually try to do things like, sit in their room and come up with a spec and come up with an idea, and then it actually gets made and people just shit all over it. It really kills me.
Yeah, me too.
So,
because like you said, it's fucking hard to get it made.
It's fucking hard.
It's hard to even get it someone to consider making it. And then once you get a group of people together and you actually fucking do something, it needs to be.
For instance, I'll give you an example of one. I'll give you an example of one that just came out. I haven't seen it, so speaks nothing to its quality. But The Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt. That's a completely new idea, big budget movie, the kind of thing that if that's a success, you might wind up in a situation where you have more Terminators or more RoboCops or more things that like we actually grew up on that we love. But The Tomorrow War, people just, I think, without having a piece of IP to kind of go after or start discussing, people just started discussing how much they hate Chris Pratt and wanted him to go away. And this movie, made absolutely no dent. Now I understand it was on, it was in the pandemic.
It was on Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Amazon, which frankly no one watches.
I'm afraid the pedant in me wouldn't shut up during that film.
Did you watch it?
I watched it, yeah.
Oh,
I watched it.
Great.
I quite like Chris Pratt and Saoirse Gabrielle, who was in Sleepy Hollow, was in it, and I think she's terrific. And the performances were great, but it made no sense to me.
You're certainly allowed to hate the movie if it comes out.
Time travel films, they have to be slightly better.
I think that
I don't really know what the movie's about even, but you're allowed to certainly hate it. You have your subjective opinion, which is totally fine. But I root, as Phil knows, very hard for these like movies that get studios to spend $100 million for new ideas, and not even because I hate the franchises, just because I know those aren't going anywhere. And
I also think whenever I see something that's in the mid-budget range, the area that is almost extinct now. Mm-hmm. If I see a film in that, I'm going to root for it, and I'm probably going to go and watch it regardless of what it is, because I want those films to keep being made.
The same thing can be said for television as well. I mean, I know that we're right now, Squid Game's the biggest thing on television or whatever you want to call it, and it is original, and that's fantastic. But then you've got everyone wants their Squid Game now. Like, it's just everyone's just going to chase that thing.
Television's a mess. Television's a mess and embarrassing. Okay. Squid Game to me is proof of one thing, and Phil, you're not going to like what I'm going to say.
Okay.
But it's proof of one thing, which is Netflix has a big old greater than sign everything else. And there is no universe where any other platform could have launched a show like Squid Game. Squid Game puts it up with no advertising on its front page, and it is the biggest fucking show in the world. That is surreal to me. And that's another thing altogether. But yeah, I mean, like, Paramount Plus, get your own Squid Game. Come on. How are you going to get people to watch Squid Game?
You know my feelings about Netflix, and it's not even that I hate Netflix.
I know you don't
at all. I don't hate them.
No
at all.
one is tweeting more about Made than you.
It's true. Made's great. I think that the bigger question I have, and Kenny and I have had this discussion many times over, but Squid Game is all the rage right now, as it should be, and it's great. 6 weeks from now, no one's going to be talking about Squid Game anymore because it will have evaporated from the zeitgeist.
Oh yeah,
and totally, I think that is the biggest problem they have is
not making all episodes at the same time.
Yeah. Not making a global phenomenon is not a problem. They can do that clearly, but making it so it stays in the zeitgeist and people continue to talk about it as a binge is antithetical.
The churn rate is insane.
Yeah.
But they, at least right now, I mean, it does feel almost like a Ponzi scheme, but at least right now there seem to be more content feeding this beast than there are, more content than we're going to run out. Like, I don't think they're going to run out, because they have so much money and because the most powerful piece of marketing real estate in the entire world is the Netflix front page. So you have that, you beat everything else.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Yeah.
Which do you guys subscribe to? How many are you subscribe
I mean, all of them, because, that's just, if I had to cut, I could live without Peacock. I could live with that. I have AMC Plus. I have Shudder. I mean, I really have all of that. So
I'm not subscribed to those. I'm subscribed to Netflix, Hulu, Criterion Channel, Disney Plus, HBO Max. I mean, all the ones Apple. I mean,
I would drop if Prime was a standalone service. I'd drop that. Prime does nothing for me, but it's essentially
I don't know about
free.
Nothing, but I don't watch much of it. I mean, listen, Kenny and I. The other thing too is that with this podcast, which we love doing, we have a lot of shows, a lot of things to watch, a lot of movies to watch, and when I can just say into my Apple TV such and such movie, and it pops up on one of the various streaming services that I subscribe to, it makes things a lot easier. I can guarantee you that there's a bunch of movies that Kenny and I have watched on Amazon Prime just purely because it just happens to be there. But it's an interesting
little things just popped up on my computer saying Squid Game has just reached 111 million views.
Okay, it just came up?
It just popped up on a little, yeah.
See, all right, that to me is way more
because they're listening to us. That's
an
why.
Example of them listening to us. Yes, it just came up on mine too. I'm kidding.
Did it? No. I'll just say this though, and this will be the last thing I say about Netflix. And this is something that Kenny knows is a bee in my bonnet. That's a meaningless statistic. This idea of
they're all
view
meaningless.
And what they constitute as a view is infuriating.
It's 2 minutes, isn't it?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I mean, I guarantee you that Kenny and I could probably come up with content that 100 million people would listen to 2 minutes of.
I mean, that's the credits. That's the opening title.
Kenny says no.
Not me. Maybe you. But I think just as a sister point to that. Fucking, it's not as if Neil.
Are you all right, Kenny? Are you okay?
He's fine. He's good.
Are you a bit cross?
All right. Hold on. Let me get it out.
Yes.
The sister point to that drives me nuts is everybody complains that Netflix is cagey with their stats. It's not Netflix's job to tell you how many people watch the show, just as it's not NBC's job. NBC doesn't tell you how many people watch their shows. Nielsen tells you how many people. Right. And there is absolutely a way for Nielsen to monitor streaming. This is not that difficult.
I'll tell you something.
Nielsen is trying to.
I know, and it's weird that they're not good at it.
Well, because
it's really, really weird with C, which is out now on Apple. What do they call it?
I have it.
Apple TV Plus.
Apple TV Plus. That's the one. Yeah. It's really odd not having viewing, not knowing if it's being watched or not. I mean, I would rather know that I put something out and no one's watching it, rather than
creator
not really
secret stats.
Nope.
Can I ask? Here's the thing, Kenny. I don't necessarily take issue with. I agree with you. It is not their job to tell us how many people watch their things. What I don't like is this in-between bullshit.
I hear you.
Where they cherry pick the fucking stuff that they want to tell us by their own bizarre metrics and then tout it as the biggest thing in the world. You don't need to tell me that Squid Game's the biggest show in the world. I know. It's all over every fucking social media that I subscribe to. I get it. It's a very big show. But then just give us the real hard facts. Don't give us some in-between step of like 111 million people watched at least 2 minutes of it. Well, how many people watched the whole fucking thing? Because those are the people that are actually invested in the show.
110 and a half, I think.
Right, sure. Yeah,
have you seen the first episode?
Yeah, it's great. To get back to Sleepy Hollow, I want to just say, as we sidetracked, but the Ichabod backstory I don't really love. That being said, what I do love is the Iron Maiden. And I do love that's just, it's worth it just to see Lisa Marie fall out of a Iron Maiden, just, in an ocean of blood. That's great. Great line that Ichabod has that feels like a total Tom Stoppard line is, perhaps there's a bit of witch in you because you've bewitched me. I
refuse to believe that Stoppard wrote that. He's the greatest living writer in the world. He did not write that. No.
Touche. I take it back. It was not Tom Stoppard. But it doesn't seem like something that Andrew Kevin Walker would write either. So, I mean, anyway.
It was improvised.
It was improvised. Yeah, exactly. So can we talk for a second about Miranda Richardson?
Yeah.
And how fucking great she is in this. Like, she's you can tell she's chewing the scenery like everyone is in this, but like, she really kills this. First of all, I mean, I do love that she's kind of playing a dual role. She plays the witch in the woods as well, and you get a great jump scare of the eyeballs coming out at you and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, that was the other bit. That was a Burtonism slightly too far for me. Mm-hmm. With the eyes coming out and the snake telling it. It's a bit cute. It's
very cute. No, I agree with you. But Miranda Richardson, when you realize, I mean, pretty early on that she's the villain, but whatever, she's just really going for it. There's also like her and Jeffrey Jones having sex in the woods is not something I ever needed to see. I think we can all agree that was perhaps a bridge too far. But also like she's cutting herself. There's all sorts of weird shit going on with her. Like she's doing all sorts of great. It's great stuff. Love it. But yeah. The shot of her in the garden, this is the other thing where this movie kind of on a plotting level where like she's in the garden, the horseman, it looks like he's about to cut her head off, but then Michael Gambon runs before he sees it, and you're just like, that's awfully convenient. I
was fine with that just because it's Gambon. It's Gambon running and being scared, and Gambon can do no wrong. I agree. I absolutely agree. So fuck you for even suggesting it.
My apologies. I take it back. Well, we'll cut it. We'll double it.
He defended Toys pretty big time a couple days ago.
Dude, Toys is great, Kenny. We got to.
He's a big Gambon fan. Don't worry.
I'm a big Gambon fan. It's funny. I didn't put two and two together. He's the villain.
Yeah, he's like the main.
No,
the military.
Toys the Robin Williams.
Yeah, he's like his uncle, stepdad, or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. It's great. That movie is Robin Williams, Robin Wright, Michael Gambon, and LL Cool J, and Joan Cusack.
That is Exhibit A. Why only Gilliam should do Gilliam, and only Burton should do Burton, because that is Levinson being like, I could do this. I want an Oscar. Try to stop me.
No, you can't.
No.
So yeah, Miranda Richardson, when she shows up in that crazy black velvet dress, it's like the most like Tim Burton villain dress that Colleen Atwood could make. It's just beautiful. It looks amazing. Okay, so Ichabod has a notebook at one point that he burns. Do you remember this? And in the notebook is like Katrina's name written in like cursive with like hearts next to it. I was like, is Ichabod literally a 12-year-old girl?
It's layers. That's how you create a nuanced character.
layers. Yeah, it's great. To wrap this up, great chase sequence. Love the chase sequence at the very end. Horsemen chasing them. So many beautiful shots. The fight on the top of the horse-drawn carriage. All that stuff is just great. I love it. I don't know how they shot it. And Tim Burton, who, by the way, not the greatest action director in the world. It is a great action sequence for a guy who clearly doesn't give a shit about action.
And also the windmill. The windmill is
windmill's
the
great.
Perfect mix of the period, the place, and Burton's aesthetic. Just that one image of that windmill looking like that. That's everything from Sleepy Hollow, from Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow in one shot.
Couldn't agree with you more. Love the kiss at the end where he bites her. Blood comes out of her mouth and they dive into the tree. Just great stuff.
Love it.
And also the line, just in time for a new century, is a nice nod to 1999, which obviously Kenny and I are in the business of. But I did find myself first of all, beautiful last shot of just this really beautiful crane shot over New York in 1899. And I couldn't help but think like, and I'm not saying I want to do this, but you could absolutely make a television show about Ichabod solving crimes in New York in the 19th century with Katrina and Masbeth. Like, it's there for the taking.
I mean, if anyone's going to do it.
Yeah, I don't want to do it.
Guys.
So let's rate this.
Just don't focus on his witch wife, for God's sake.
I want to know I want to know about Ichabod before he time traveled. You want
him in the Revolutionary War? You want just a show about that? Yeah.
No, I want him after the Revolutionary War. Like we never knew, but he was resurrected in between.
Oh, interesting.
We never knew. We found out later. Yeah. And he had
How many times do you think in a pitch in Hollywood someone has said, "This is the story you didn't know about ... Fuck off. Anyway, moving on.
I know. Sure, the people I feel worst for in this town are the development execs. I think about it all the time. Like have you ever seen the development exec schedule?
I live with one.
Oh, you live with one.
She's in her room all day long. She comes out at lunch and
crazy.
It's
awful.
Really?
Crazy. 6 pitches a day. They turn down pitches constantly, but 6 pitches a day, and they must be all the same pitches.
Yeah. I mean, listen. You can imagine what I hear on a daily basis. It's not great.
God, you are so lucky. I wish I lived at the development exec.
So let's do our ratings, and then let's do our Tim Burton movies so that we can all move on with our lives.
Let her know I feel bad for her.
Okay, I'll let her know. So I saw this movie in 99. I fucking loved it. I gave it like a 97 back in 99. I mean, I adored it. It was everything that I wanted it to be. Before this podcast, I've gone down a little bit, but as you can imagine, I haven't gone down much. I love this movie. I'm basically at a 93 pre and post. I think I love the film. I mean, I can nitpick. There are things that aren't perfect about it. I do wish that they gave Katrina a little bit more to do. Christina Ricci in particular, I feel, is such a great actor, and I kind of wish that she was given a little bit more to do. So there's little things here and there, but like I could watch this movie every day. I adore it. But what about you, Kenny?
I thought I had written this down somewhere, but I can't find it, so I'm just gonna wing it. So I definitely saw this movie not in 99, but in college at some point. I liked it. I didn't love it. I still don't love it. I mean, I think I would have given it like a 75 then. I think I would give it I would give it like an 83 before and after. I think it's really a really good movie. I don't think it's really good Burton. Okay. And that's not a huge knock on it, but I think it's not quite in the, and you'll see with my my top 5 Burton. It's not exactly in that lane. I don't think it really lends itself to what I love about him as a director. I think he did a really good job with the material, and I think it looks incredible, and I have a lot of respect for what they've done with this. But ultimately, it's not going to be my favorite movie or my favorite kind of movie. 83 is good, though. Very good.
I'd say
I think it's a very good
at the time really liked it, probably 80. And actually, it's gone up watching it again. I think my appreciation of it is so much more. So now, 87.
Okay. All right.
I really enjoyed watching it. It's only not in the 90s because the end, I loved all of the action stuff, but that denouement went on for so long.
It did.
And I think rather spoiled it.
Before we go to our Burtons, I want to ask you both one more question.
Please.
Because, you answer it best of your own abilities. How much of this movie did you consciously run towards and consciously run away from when you were working on your own Sleepy Hollow?
Well, okay. I mean, I will say that for me personally, when I was coming up with it, or with the concept of it, I don't know that I really thought that much about it, if I'm being completely frank.
Interesting.
Really? Because I had forgotten when we were making ours that in the Burton one, the horseman was formerly a Hessian soldier.
Yeah.
And I'd forgotten that there was so much witchcraft involved. And neither of those things were from the book, but they made it into the show.
I imagine that, if you were to ask Alex, I bet he would say that this was a big touchstone for him. More so, I think that in my brain, I was really just trying to create a television show and was less trying to attach ourselves to the movie in its own way. I think also because our thing was modern, and because the Revolutionary War figured into it, the timeline in my brain, they just didn't speak to each other because this movie is at a different time. So that's why I didn't think about it that much. I would also say too that the Ichabod and Abby relationship, which obviously is so paramount to our show, obviously is not in the movie. So that was really kind of one of the things that I was really trying to sort of focus on. So that was probably
I also that his Ichabod and our Crane were just wildly different characters.
Yeah, totally.
They were so obviously different on the page, and plus with the relationship with Abby, I always in the movie Ichabod's the lead, but I always thought of Abby as the lead of our show, and Ichabod.
It's funny that's a totally valid takeaway. I think that because she is in our time, because so much of our mythology,
she's the guide. She's the one who takes him.
Abby definitely, at least in the beginning, was conceived as the lead. And I think she was the lead, but and
that's why I think we then struggled, as we said, showing more of Crane, because he should be a peripheral oddity. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that it's listen, there were any number of sorry, go ahead.
No, she's the level-headed detective. And Crane was the eccentric genius person, the eccentric expert, I guess you could say. Over the course of, you guys did what, 80 episodes, something like that. Over the course of 80 episodes, of course, you're gonna get into that character's mindset and his POV over and over again. But that's a big difference between the two pieces.
And also, I wanted to avoid it because Johnny Depp is such a remarkable actor and beautiful, and just it's Johnny Depp. And so if you're playing a character that he's played, it must be like.
Well, that was one of the things that I appreciated so much about your performance, Tom, is that you made it your own, right? Like there was no, you're not gonna copy him. You're not gonna do what Johnny does. You want to make it your own. We tried to do everything we could to make our version of this, which was obviously very different in its own way. And I think we succeeded at that. But I do think that the movie, I love the movie, as you'll see when I do my top 5, that it still holds a place in my heart, not just because of the show, obviously, but just of what he was trying to do. But should we do our Burtons?
Yeah,
I'll start.
It's such a difficult question.
Can I just say, Kenny, and it will surprise you not at all. It was really hard. This was the hardest top 5 I've had to do.
Interesting. Me too. Well,
I struggle with 4 out of the 5 of these as to where they fall in this ranking. Daily changes. Yeah. So today, this is what it is. But I imagine tomorrow it could be something.
Would you say? But also with a lot of his films, I've not seen them for years and years.
Right.
When I was a kid, he was so important to me. He was my favorite director for such a long time. But I haven't watched these for at least 10 years, most of them.
I think mine are different than yours. But
I think yours will be different than mine.
Let's go ahead and do it.
So my number 5 is Sleepy Hollow. I don't need to say we've talked about this movie for several hours now, but I'll just say this. In terms of Tim Burton's oeuvre and his filmmaking and what have you, I think that this film is the most successful attempt as a filmmaker of taking something, a genre of filmmaking that he loves, and translating that into a movie that stands on its own 2 feet. He's tried to do that several times and has fallen on his face most times. So this is the movie that he obviously loved Hammer horror films. He obviously loved this genre, and he dove headfirst into it. And I think he was quite successful in doing it. I also think that it's arguably his most beautiful looking movie. If you talk about production value, if you talk about Tim Burton, you can't help but talk about set design and talk about all those things. And I think that this film is the perfect distillation of that for me personally. So that's why it's my number 5. Kenny, what's your...
My number 5 is I think this is where I start to deviate right away. Mm-hmm. My number 5 is Beetlejuice.
Okay.
Which I love, which I've shown my kids, and I think it's an amazing, fun, incredible movie. I love Michael Keaton's performance in it. I love Winona Ryder in it. I love everyone who sits around the table and sings Deo. I think it's a fantastic movie about how fun it would be to be dead. And
also we watched it last year with my son, and he was 5 at the time, and there are bits of it that are a lot darker than
randier.
But he loved it. He loved it, and he dressed up as Beetlejuice for Halloween last year, and he loved it, and I loved it. And what's so striking about it is Michael Keaton's hardly in it.
Yeah, I know.
Beetlejuice is a really small role in it, but as it's Burton doing what he does best, and that's an iconic character who's only in the film for 20 minutes.
Yep.
I really like. There are a couple. One that I've left off, but a couple of his films where the color palette is so specific to that movie. Totally. And if you showed people like the 10 colors he uses. Well, frame for sure, but even just the colors be like Beetlejuice. And that's true for a lot of his films, actually, which I really love and respect about, the way he puts his mark on what he does.
What's your number 5, Tom?
My number 5, I really, really wanted one of his animations in my top 5, but I couldn't put it. And Corpse Bride was nearly going to be the number 5. And then I realized it's just because I want an if he had directed Nightmare Before Christmas, that would definitely be probably near the top of my list. I was desperate for it, but didn't make it. Instead, and this was such a difficult thing, and it changed in the week since you sent me a text and said prepare your 5. It changed daily. But number 5, Sleepy Hollow.
There you go.
Like you said, when you've got that DP and it looks like that, and it's so much fun. And Christopher Walken, it's made the list because of Walken's pervy look. at the very end.
No one does a pervy look like Chris Walken. My number 4 is Beetlejuice. I for all the reasons that we've said, I also just think it's worth highlighting too that that movie makes not a lick of fucking sense. If you think about it in any way on a script level, like if we sat down to read that script, we'd be like, wait, so why are they on Saturn? Why are there sandworms? What? Like, it's just it doesn't. It really doesn't make any sense, and it
really doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at
more
all.
than most people.
More than and I think that it's an unfortunate lesson to some degree that Tim Burton learned from that film, which is it doesn't matter if it makes sense, and sometimes it does matter. But in this particular instance, that movie is just a magnificent. Every time I watch it, I'm just like, this movie is gonzo, wonderful, everything about it. I love it. So that's my number 4. What's your 4, Kenny?
My 4 is Batman.
Batman.
I love Batman. Batman's great. Love
Batman's
that. One of the first movie-going experiences I remember.
Same.
We're going to do a whole episode of them on Batman on the Patreon.
Will.
There's not too much to say, but obviously Batman is a extremely important movie and not an obvious Burton movie, but I think it kind of opened up this other lane that he's really good at. So
I agree. What's your
number 4,
Tom?
Batman Returns.
Ooh.
Batman didn't make my top 5, but Batman Returns in at number 4. It starts to become a little more Burton-esque than the first film.
For
sure. Particularly with the Penguin. I love Christopher Nolan. He's one of the last auteurs, and he's one of the best British directors ever. But watching his Batman films, all I kept thinking was he would never cast Danny DeVito. And I struggled with that.
Never.
Danny DeVito's perfect. Michelle Pfeiffer is absolute perfection in that film. Keaton is amazing.
I have a feeling this again is going to come up again.
Yeah, this movie's going to come up again. Don't you worry.
Good. So yeah, Batman Returns, and I'm still questioning whether it should be higher.
It
Phil,
is
what's
higher
your 3?
for me.
Phil, what's your 3?
My 3 is Edward Scissorhands. Edward Scissorhands is a weird movie for me because as a kid, when I saw it in the theater, it was 10. It came out in 90. It actually scared me, and I was like, I don't like this. It did not work for me. Subsequently, I think it's a masterpiece. I think that if you told Tim Burton he could only have one movie that was shot into space that was like him, I think it's Edward Scissorhands. Like, I think that it does all the things. I mean, he is Edward Scissorhands for all intents and purposes. Like him growing up in Burbank, it's just the most autobiographical Tim Burton movie. Just a magnetic performance, a star-making performance from Johnny Depp. I love it to death. It's great. I mean, what can be said about Edward Scissorhands? Danny Elfman's score, all of it's great. That's my number.
It's so great and it's so iconic, but it didn't make my list.
It also didn't make my list, and it it's
okay.
I mean, it was between that and Beetlejuice for 6th. I mean, they're both amazing films. They're the 2 most Burton-esque films.
Okay, what's your 3?
And I don't disagree with you. I think Edward Scissorhands is everything for me, but it's not as funny and winning and wonderful and weird and goofy and pleasurable as Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Well,
Pee-wee's Big Adventure is my number 3.
Great.
As much fun as you can have at the movies. So fun, so silly, such a great time. I mean, that I absolutely love Pee-wee's Big Adventure because the thing about Pee-wee's Big Adventure is that it very much takes place in the real world. Everybody who populates the world is a total fucking lunatic. But the world itself is real, and I absolutely love that about the movie. And I think Paul Rubens is unbelievably awesome in that film.
So do I. And also, what an amazing decision of his to pick this young director who had never directed a feature before. But
I love Pee-wee.
He'd be able to populate a real world with otherworldly things.
Yeah,
in a way that only Burton can.
You really do have to hand it to Paul Rubens for seeing the vision and seeing like the potential in Tim Burton at that stage in his career for sure. And I love Pee-wee, don't get me wrong. Let me rephrase. I love Pee-wee's Big Adventure as a film. I actually don't really love the Pee-wee character, which is why it's not in my top 5.
Well, I love Pee-wee in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Right.
And and I also love the show, but the other movies he's in, it's not the same.
I mean, he is.
The recent
dad,
one is fucking great too. He's forget it. I love Pee-wee. He's amazing.
Pee-wee's great. What's your 3, Tom?
Edward. It nearly didn't. There were days when it wasn't on my 5. There were days when it was higher up. It's obviously his best film. It's obviously his best made film. It's terrific, and it's
that's your number 3.
That's my number 3, and it has to be in a Burton list. The performances, every single performance is
Bill Murray.
Perfect. Ugh. Bill Murray is so amazing in it. Yeah. And it's his best made. It's terrific.
It's wonderful. It's higher up on my list, so I'll talk about it when I get to it. But I adore it. My number 2. So this is where I struggle
right now.
This is my 2. This was the hardest choice for me to make.
This is the weirdest thing of all time that's about to happen.
Yeah. So my number 2 is Batman Returns.
That's the weirdest thing of all time to me.
I really struggled with this. This was like because anyone who listens to any podcast I've ever been on knows that I love Batman Returns more than anything. I think that
I thought it was like your favorite movie.
It's one of my favorite movies. I'm talking about Tim Burton's top 5 films, and I think that. I mean, you can obviously guess what my number 1 is. I struggled with this 1 and 2 placement because I love Batman Returns so much. But ultimately, I came back to just the purity of I'm not the biggest biopic fan in the world. And I really do think that Ed Wood's one of the best biopics you could ever make. So
do your 2 and 1 right now.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of do
you did it. So because I'll do mine too.
So Batman Returns, I mean, listen, I have run out of words for my love for Michelle Pfeiffer's performance in Batman Returns. As anyone who's listened to the podcast I did about Batman Returns on Norm Wilner's podcast, it is just everything that I love about Batman and about Tim Burton. Is a weird movie about weird people that just don't fit in the world and don't know how to love and be human. And like, it's a deep, dark, weird, beautifully made movie. Everything about it is perfect. I really have no flaws with Batman Returns. In terms of Ed Wood, I think the reason that I gave it the slightest of edges over Batman Returns is because of just the amount of love for filmmaking. You know, Tim Burton is not a filmmaker that talks much about his process, who talks much about why he does what he does. And Ed Wood just feels like the most open-hearted love letter to the making of motion pictures and why people do it. And on top of all of that, it is just brimming with the weirdest group of people that he could like. It's got a whole bunch of weirdos in it. I mean, Sarah Jessica Parker, who's great in it. Bill Murray and everybody in it is just fantastic. The only bummer is that Danny Elfman didn't do the score. It's the only score of Tim Burton's movies that is not Danny Elfman, but Howard Shore did a very good job. But yeah, so ultimately, long story short, love both these films. They're basically both number 1. I mean, I don't know.
But you had to choose, and you did.
I had to choose, and that's what I chose today.
My number 1 and number 2 are the same movies.
Just inverted.
And inverted. Because I agree with both of you. I do think Ed Wood is his best film. Yeah. And Batman Returns is my favorite. So,
listen, man, I can't argue with that. I agree.
I went with my favorite, but I wouldn't just go with my favorite if I didn't also think that it's best in breed, right? Like I think I think it is the best superhero movie. Yeah. I think it is the best Christmas movie. I mean, I think like when we were talking about the production design of Sleepy Hollow, I kind of swallowed my tongue because I knew we'd be talking about Batman Returns later. And Batman Returns is the Burton movie where I'm jaw dropped every moment.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, totally agree with Dan on the Danny DeVito thing. I think Max Schreck is an unbelievable character that you only have to watch the movie to understand how integral he is to the plot and the mechanics. And then obviously Michelle Pfeiffer's performance, obviously Michael Keaton's performance, but what this movie has that no other movie in this genre has ever had is that chemistry. The chemistry between the two of them is It's a bonfire.
And a giant duck with penguins with rockets.
And it has a giant duck. This movie genuinely terrified me the first time I saw it in the theaters.
Oh, yeah.
Any film would be improved by a giant duck.
Yeah. It is a weirdly, this movie scared me when I was in the theaters, weirdly in the 90s. So this came out, I think, in 95, right, Phil?
92.
And 92. So some point in the 90s, probably around 95, 96, I had this urge to go and rent this movie. A movie that I didn't particularly love in the theaters, and started like a 25-year love affair with it because I think it's the greatest. I think it's just.
I didn't like it in the theater either.
I had it on VHS. I didn't see it in the cinema. I had it on VHS, and my brother and I watched that VHS every single weekend.
Yeah,
for about a year. And that's not an exaggeration. We'd have a little bit of time while dinner was getting ready, and we'd pop on Batman Returns, and obsessed with it, loved it.
I love the original Batman. I love the original Batman. And, part of the reason why I think I was turned off in the beginning with Batman Returns was because I love the original Batman so much. But there's a place in my heart now for both. That being said, Batman doesn't fucking hold a candle to Batman Returns.
I agree with you. Obviously, wholeheartedly agree with everything you're saying. It's interesting. One of the things that I think is worth mentioning too, in this comic book world that we live in, where, there's a million of these fucking movies and what have you, I still don't think a film has juggled the idea of multiple villains as well as Batman Returns did. They're all really feeding each other thematically, from a plot perspective, all of that stuff so beautifully. And yet we've seen everyone fuck it up since. It is kind of shocking.
How about that last shot? That wasn't even her. That wasn't even supposed to be in it.
It wasn't even her. What's your 2 and 1, Tom?
Brace yourselves. Number 2 is Beetlejuice.
Okay.
The Juice.
Love it.
The Juice.
I always loved it.
Loose.
I watched it again. It might be because, with the exception of watching Sleepy Hollow a few weeks ago, it's the most recent one that I watched.
Yeah.
Number 1, get ready. And it's this is one that I've not watched for probably about 15 years, but it holds such a special place in my heart. It's Mars Attacks. Even after talking about CG and Burton being better without CG, it holds it as I love sci-fi. Sure. And to see him do Tim Burton's Ed Wood sci-fi.
I want to watch it right now.
With Tom Jones punching, aliens in the face and shouting, come on, girls, and hurrying showgirls out of Vegas. Fucking great. With the idea that it's an accidental war because some hippie releases a dove.
Correct.
And that frightens the piss out of them and infuriates them, and that starts global cataclysm. And then accidentally someone pulls the headphones out of the socket of an old woman listening to country music, and they discover country music makes their brains explode.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. The look of it, the design of it, I think is perfect. I love this film, and I'll probably go and watch it again next week, and I'll probably loathe it.
Just to be clear, I love Mars Attacks too.
I think I might watch it in the next couple of days. Yeah,
it is a great movie. I think
Jack Nicholson is excellent. Pierce Brosnan is hilarious. Sarah Jessica Parker. Sarah Jessica Parker gets her head put on a chihuahua.
I'll say this though.
Glenn Close is in it.
One of the things that I think is great about it is that it's at least pretty clear to me that he's like, what movie would Ed Wood make if he got $100 million?
Yes, quite.
Mm-hmm. And that
he made it.
Is lovely. And he made it. And more power to him. I love Mars Attacks. I think that's a bold and awesome number 1 pick.
Great choice.
It's a great pick. Tom, we cannot thank you enough for coming on to talk about Sleepy Hollow.
I can't thank you enough. I'd really have nothing else to do. I'd just be sitting in a dark corner
Jesus.
Thinking about you. And thank you for giving me a purpose.
Listen, this was everything that I could have wanted from this episode, which I was nervous about doing and how to do it. And this is everything that I could have wanted it to be. So I appreciate both of you letting me rant. But this was absolutely wonderful. We can't wait to have you on to talk about Beau Travail at some point.
Oh, listen, this is what the world needs. They need, a 2-hour-long meditation on the male physique.
Can I just say that
in French, as thought of by a fucking flouncing 1940s Thesp throwback and a fucking neurotic Jewish writer in LA and fucking Kenny.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. Kenny is also a neurotic Jewish writer.
I was dying to hear what you were going to say about me, and fucking Kenny is perfect.
Can I just say, though, that someone DM'd me on Twitter when we released the schedule for October that said that you were coming on for Sleepy Hollow. And they were like, can't wait to listen to this. Super excited. So thrilled that it's not that weird French movie.
The weird French movie is coming.
I will say that French movie, Beau Travail, has my favorite ending of any film ever.
It's been on many lists of best endings. I haven't read any of it.
Of all
I've never read what it is.
I've never seen it, so I can't wait. All right, let's do it soon so we can watch it. We're going to do this.
Tom,
well,
thank you again.
Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.